welcome to the Wild Food People podcast. This is our episode on the game fair at Blenheim Palace, which is going to sound like an advert. It's going to sound like an advertorial. It's going to sound like a sponsored podcast. It's really not. The reason this podcast exists, or this particular episode exists, is because understanding wild food in the UK, in Europe overall, I think, but in the UK particularly, you have to understand it at a cultural level. You can't just look at it as an activity. You can't just look at it as resources to be used. You have to understand the culture, because the culture for wild food, whether it's foraging, whether it's fishing, whether it's shooting and hunting, it's all tied into land ownership, land management policy, and economics, and the economy that exists around those things. The economy that exists around farming will have an impact on the land management, which will have an impact on the conservation, which will have an impact on the wild species that live in that area, whether they have fur, feathers, or
Scales.
Fins, mycelial cells.
Yeah.
Vascular plants, all of those things. But anything that you could class as wild food in the UK is downstream of land management, which is downstream of the economy, and then what's upstream of that, politics. But the game fair, which is next week at time of recording, so when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it as a patron, I think you're listening to it on Saturday. If you're listening to it as a member of the public, I think you're listening to this on Monday morning?
Yes,
afternoon, Monday morning, or at least from then.
Mm-hmm.
The game fair is the following weekend, so I think it's 26th, 27th and 28th of July.
Yep.
And it's at Blenheim Palace down in Oxfordshire, so it's about 3.5-4 hours from where we are in northeast Wales. And it's either closer to you or further away from you, depending on where you live. I mean, if you live in Iowa, it's a long way away. If you live in Oxfordshire, it's not very far away.
It's a very good way of explaining it.
It's a relative scale.
Geographical location.
If you want to become a better forager, if you want to become a better angler, a better hunter, the thing I've said for a long time now is that you need to understand the land. You need to understand that habitat, that ecosystem, that environment, why that thing is living there, why that thing is doing that thing. To understand that, you need to be able to understand how that landscape is managed and how it's actually managed, the motivations of the people that are managing it, and the things that affect their decisions around it. So that could be moral, it could be ethical, it could be financial, it could be policy driven. Understanding that will help you understand that culture, and understanding that culture will help you understand where you can find these things in other places, and you'll be able to see the opportunities afforded to you. So something that comes up in the UK discourse around wild food a lot is that it's very elitist, that unless you can pay thousands of pounds to shoot pheasants, or unless you can pay to take exclusive rights with your fishing club for the bank of one river or something like that, that you have no other access to wild food. Whereas we don't pay for access to wild food.
We do not.
I shoot over about 2,500 acres of land, that none of which I own, all of which I have permission from by speaking to farmers, by speaking to landowners, by speaking to other people. We know where we can fish for wild fish that is ethical and appropriate to take home for the table. We know how to access that for a small fee, so we do pay for that, but we don't pay for continual access. We know where to find fish in the sea, where we can find wild food legally and ethically from the ground, whether it's plants and mushrooms and that kind of thing. Understanding this culture and understanding how all of these things fit together is really, really important for getting more wild food into your diet, or making it part of how you live. And weirdly, going to at least one day of this 3-day festival of the countryside, festival of rural shopping, Glastonbury with wellies, as you'll hear about later on in the episode, that's a really good lever into this. It's a really good way of coming into that world and understanding what's going on, the good and the bad. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shut up now, and Amy's going to talk.
So my background is different to Richard's. And this has probably become evident through the podcast and through videos, or if you've attended one of our courses. My background is that I grew up near Manchester. It was kind of semi-urban, rural-ish. And my interactions with the countryside were for leisure, essentially. I went to county shows. I remember distinctly finding the ferrets at one of them and holding a ferret, my mum thinking that it looked really cute, and then smelling them. So I was never allowed to have ferrets.
That was the end of ferrets.
That was the end of my dream to have a ferret. But that was my sort of interaction, and it was always positive, and I would go for walks in local farmers' fields where there was footpaths, but I never interacted on a hunting or shooting kind of plane. Until I met Richard, basically. He introduced me to all of this, and it was him who first said, "Do you want to go to the game fair?" And I said, "Well, what's the game fair? Explain it to me." And he described this place where, to be honest,
it's not Narnia.
It's not Narnia, no, but he described it to me in such a way that, as somebody who was not part of a shooting community, hunting, I'd not been fishing, I had picked plants, but that was about it. I'd picked plants and made things with them. But the game fair as a name was something that I probably wouldn't have said, yeah, I really want to go to that, if I had just seen it advertised. But we went, and it was amazing. We went and I felt very welcomed. I spoke to loads of really friendly people. I saw breeds of dogs that I didn't even know existed.
Spinonis.
Yep, Spinonis. And we went to lots of different displays and lectures and heard people talking about the interactions and the positive impact that this close connection to nature and this the fact that if you are involved in wild food, then you are intrinsically involved in wildlife and in the nature which we all live in, because how that is managed and how that is cared for or not impacts what wild food is available. And so it's crucial, and that really hit home for me because my background is in wildlife conservation. I've done lots of work with different habitats and thinking about them in terms of wildlife, but never from the perspective of wild food.
Yeah, because you've got this background as well in outdoor activity, adventure, and you've done lots of traveling overseas, and you've backpacked overseas and done. And I, particularly when we first met, and I knew you in that world. You were climbing, you were hill walking, you were doing those kind of things.
Yeah.
If we had gone to, I don't know if it even still exists, but it used to be the Ordnance Survey Outdoors Show at the NEC, the Outdoor Expo or something.
Yeah.
Might have even come back, but I haven't been for years. You could go to one of those things. It'd be this huge show with tens of thousands of people.
Yes.
All these stalls, every manufacturer, every brand associated with outdoor activity, the hiking, hill walking, that kind of outdoors in the UK. You could wander around there for 2-3 days. I think you'd really struggle to have a single conversation about conservation, a single conversation about land management. What you might see, a few of the hill walking organisations like the British Mountaineering Council or someone like that, who would be talking about footpath repairs or infrastructure for hiking and hill walking. Or you might see access campaigners, or the Ramblers, or probably now Right to Roam and those kind of campaign groups. But you would have no representation there from the people who manage the land. Whereas when you go to the game fair, there's whole segments of it which are about land management. I mean, there are it's like a festival, so you have different gates, 2 or 3 different gates, depending on which car park you're ushered into.
Yes.
Like the purple gate and the red gate and so on.
Yeah.
And last year in the 2023 event, we went in through one gate, and the first row we went past was basically all forestry machinery.
Yeah.
There was a wood chipper in there it was the size of a small house, literally. It was this huge trailer, and it would take 3-foot diameter trees in one go. And that has got very little to do with shooting pheasants, but it has a lot to do with land management.
It does.
And that's the thing with a game fair. You see all of these things in one place, and the people who use them and the people who work within the policies for doing that in a way that you wouldn't have access to in these other outdoor kind of things. So it is that conversations about conservation that you don't have when you go to other things related to outdoor recreation.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that was the thing, as I say, that made it really hit home with me. It was the fact that there was all these people there who were very open to talking about what they were doing, what they were planning on doing, how government policy was affecting things going forward as well. That comes up there because it's really important, basically. And it was enlightening, because I had no idea of the spectrum of people as well who would be there, who were interested in the different sides of field sports. But everybody there is there for just to celebrate it all and to talk about it all and to show it off to anyone who will come. There's also a lot of people there who were walking around who were like me at the time, who had no connection to that world, apart from that they perhaps lived nearby where this event was happening, and it sounded like a good day out. It sounded like it was something interesting to do with their kids, like a county show, but on a much bigger scale.
I think the spread of people there as well is part of it. That you can have walking through the same aisle, the same area of the fair, you can have real gentry people who
arrive in helicopters.
Well, that's the thing, yeah. If you have an event that has helicopter parking, you know that you're dealing with one end of the social financial spectrum, maybe. But you get that at Silverstone. You get that at Wembley. You get that at, there's not helicopter parking at Wembley, but you get the idea. The other end of the scale, which I think we happily sit within.
Yes, I would say so.
The scruffier end of the scale. You'll see people who their whole love is working with ferrets.
Yeah.
Controlling rabbits. Or they go out shooting on the marshes and wildfowling.
Yeah.
And all of their shooting and hunting activity takes place knee deep in mud, or some other real connection to the land that is not through ownership, is not through inheritance.
No.
Or at least not through property inheritance, it's through sort of cultural inheritance. But I think there are 4 different game fairs going on at the same time.
Right.
And this is sort of how I segment it down. So the game fair is over 3 days. It's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday tends to be more of it's professionals, really.
Yeah.
So what I'm about to say applies more to the Friday, because that's where the split is. But the event overall, there are 4 types of game fair happening at the same time. One is fashion, which is probably the most obvious one.
Yes.
Because there is a high fashion element to the game fair. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like horse racing or something like that, when you have Ladies' Day.
Friday is Ladies' Day.
Oh, is it Friday's Ladies' Day?
Day.
Oh, okay. What you will see a lot of is people wearing rural brands.
Yep.
So I don't know rural female brands, and you're probably not...
Fairfax and Favour.
Fairfax and Favour, that's a big one. Dubarry.
Holland Cooper. Dubarry, yes.
Not Holland and Holland, they make guns.
Wellygogs.
Yes, those kind of things.
Yeah.
There's a whole little fashion end
there is.
Near one of the rings. Mm-hmm. You will see a lot of white capri pants.
Yes.
Or mini skirts.
Yeah, like tweed
mini skirts, white shirt, a hat.
Fedora.
A
fedora.
Sometimes a scarf. Sometimes not a scarf.
Yeah, depends on the weather.
Yes. And variations within that.
Yes.
Gentlemen wearing either brogues or Chelsea boots.
Yes.
Somewhere in between. Or wellies, if they want to... I don't know what they're trying to transmit there. Is it that you are more of a farmer, more of a land manager rather than gentleman?
Possibly, yeah.
But there's wellies there. And then you've got different grade of wellies, and they go all the way through to sort of the leather zip-up DeBarry boot type things, or lace-up ones.
Yep.
Some kind of either cords or plain trousers. Not that many jeans on show.
No.
And then a
Not
check
many.
shirt and a shuffle. So
Yes.
a shuffle it's a posh fleece waistcoat, if you're not in that world. I don't have a shuffle. I have the Jack Pike equivalent.
Yeah.
I have two. I have a neat Jack Pike waistcoat and I have a scruffy Jack Pike waistcoat. And between the two, that's me covered for most events.
Yeah, that's about right. And you couldn't sell 2 Jack Pikes and make a shuffle. You'd need more Jack Pikes to make a shuffle.
Yeah, it's like how many Dalmatians does it take to make a coat? It's like how many Jack Pike waistcoats in a shuffle? I think it's 10.
I think so.
So that's kind of the uniform for that, and that's fashion. And you'll see higher and lesser degrees of that, but you will see fashion game fair. Then there's luxury shopping game fair, which is you can buy very, very, very expensive statues and artworks.
You can.
I don't know if they were there last year, but they were there the year before. If you've seen the Guy Ritchie films in the last decade or so, he always features this huge outdoor barbecue thing. It's the one from The Gentleman, and it was in the Gentleman TV show, and it was in some other film we saw.
It's been in a few things, but yeah, it's had like a central fire,
Yeah.
doesn't it? And then a table, and it's all it's beautiful.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Anyway, he sells them.
Yeah.
And the company that sells them, they have a stand there. And that year it was next to his pop-up wooden pub in a trailer that was
Yeah.
brilliant. So you can buy
Great stuff.
very, very expensive luxury goods. And in fact, last year we were there. The reason we were there was because we were working on the stand of a brand that we worked with using wild plants and wild ingredients. So that's why we were there, although I did escape and
You did.
bought a gun. So,
Yeah. Well,
there's luxury shopping game fair, and then there's like a food element to that as well. And you can, if you took £1,000, you'd easily spend it on gin on its own,
yes, you would.
and that would only cover a third of the gin alcohol stands there, and you can buy some very, very expensive things. Third type of game fair is shopping, but it's rural shopping. So that's more where I head to. So that's
Yeah.
you're looking for deals on clothing, you're looking for deals on gadgets and bits for rifles and shooting
Yeah.
and shotguns. If you wanted to buy a second-hand shotgun, if you've just got your shotgun certificate, you want to buy your first shotgun, you don't know what you need, but you want to buy something that's good, and you want to have a look at different shotguns and try all the different things, the game fair is a reasonable place to go for that.
Yeah.
I think the cheapest gun I bought there was £100,
Yeah, I think so.
which it's not very expensive in gun world. It's also not particularly good as a gun, but it was £100. So it's one step up from a fence post, really.
Yeah.
And you have all the accessories for that. So you can look at all the new stuff. You can look at all the shiny stuff, all the thermal imaging stuff, and all the night vision things, and all these other gadgets. And there's clothing. And you can buy a car. You can buy a truck. You can buy a lorry. You can buy a custom-built Range Rover built to your specifications from one particular brand. There are all these rural-related things that you can go off and buy, but people do go there just for those bargains. So, you save buying something in the summer until you go to one of these fairs, particularly the game fair, because we've just had the Scottish game fair as well for the people up north. And then there's there was a Welsh game fair, but it's not running this year. But people go to these fairs expecting to buy things, and they want to go and buy something they can fondle, see in person, and so on. The only thing you won't find really for sale is ammunition. There's very little, if any, ammunition on sale at the game fair. You do get ammunition on sale at the stalking show and the shooting show and places like that. But at the game fair itself, you used to see it. You used to see shotgun cartridges and things for sale. Not really much anymore, and almost certainly not rifles. No centerfire or rimfire ammunition. But you have that rural shopping game fair. So that's number 3. And number 4 is politics and communication. And that's what we're going for on the Friday, because there's the Carter Jonas Theatre right in the middle. And if you look on I think Field Sports TV have it on their YouTube channel. They have some of the interviews from last year and some of the talk, because they have conversations on stage with a live audience. Some people give talks, and there's this non-stop itinerary of things all the way through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and there's a huge spread of things there. And then you have these organizations that represent shooting, represent conservation, represent land management, they lobby on policy, they represent gamekeepers, they represent people who work on the land. They all have their own stands there. There are clubs, there are places that you can sign up for deer stalking, there are places you can sign up for overseas hunting, and they run hunting trips, and there are all of these communication channels that exist there. And you're not going onto these stands to buy anything. You're going on there to have a conversation. You're going on there to have a conversation about changes in policy, changes in law that are coming up. We've just had the general election, which means Labour are in power now, and in the King's speech that we've just had, I don't think there was any mention of farming or food security in there. So there are lots of questions about, okay, what is shooting, what is land management, what's farming going to look like in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? You can go onto the Basque stand, you can go onto the Game and Wildlife Conservancy Trust stand or another stand like that and speak to the people who speak to government, literally the people, not a spokesperson for it. You can go and find the person who is sat in on that meeting with DEFRA or with Natural Resources Wales or one of the government agencies that affects what will happen or will have to enact the policy of the government in a way that you can't elsewhere. If I was to email the director of Basque Wales and say, what's going to happen with this? I might get redirected to a blog page or something like that. But I could try and track him down at the game fair. Don't worry, I'm not going to. You can have those conversations there.
You can.
And that connection and that communication is the fourth type. It's really, really important.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that is the thing I would say is really worth going for. If you don't know about something related to this world, or you want to know more, and I think you would have fallen into this category maybe in 2018, 2017. If you're working in ecology, conservation, land management of some type, but you're not involved in shooting, field sports, and you have preconceptions around it, if you're willing to spend the entry fee and go there, and you have the opportunity to go there and take that conversation. Go up to somebody and say, I think this is true. I think that this is abhorrent. I think that this is a horrible thing. I think that you do this. And you may be surprised with the answer. You may be surprised with the response you get. Yeah, I think you would. It's, as I said before, everybody there was very much open to conversation. And that is very important, I feel. And that's, like I said, it's the game fair has something for everybody, I think is key. Yeah. As you said, there's those 4 different types, and then there's also things like you can have a go at things that you wouldn't be able to otherwise. You can go and learn how to tie a fly. You can have a lesson about casting. You can try your hand at clays. You can shoot at targets with an air rifle, all under instruction, all safely. And these are all things that you may not have the opportunity to do otherwise unless you know somebody who is in that world. Yeah, so that's another. It's not a type of the game fair, but I think it could be a draw, and it's possibly something that is missed off sometimes, because there are some things that you want to try before you actually spend money on them, or before you say, no, I don't like doing that. If you don't know how to get into these things, if you don't know how to approach these things, if you don't know what opportunities are available to you, it's actually quite difficult to research in the UK. And that's something, one of the reasons this podcast exists, and we're going to expand that out, is, okay, I want to learn how to do this. I'm not from this world. How do I do it? Yeah. How I want to shoot, I want to hunt deer and have the meat from it to fill my freezer, because I've heard about it on Joe Rogan's podcast. I've heard about all the benefits of elk meat and venison, and I want to I want to do that. I've watched Meat Eater. I've watched every episode of that.
Yeah.
I've consumed all this American content, all this international content. I want to do that for myself. You can go to the game fair and ask these kind of questions.
You can.
I would say that if you have grown up in the field sports, hunting, countryside world, all of that stuff came naturally to you. All that stuff was, you were indoctrinated into that from the start. And if you don't, you have to acknowledge, if you're coming to it from the outside, that you asking really basic questions, you're going to raise an eyebrow or two.
Yeah.
But if you approach it in the right way and say, look, I've heard all this, I've seen all of these things. I want to do it. What can I actually do? How close to reality am I with my desires, with what I feel like I can get done here?
Yeah.
And you might go and find out that, okay, so if you want to shoot deer in the UK for food, you need to have a rifle, which means you need to have a firearm certificate. There are certain restrictions regarding criminal convictions and things like that. You need to have a good reason to own that rifle and that caliber. You need to have somewhere to store it. You need to go through the application process, which can take up to 2 years, depending on where you are.
Yep.
You need to submit your medical records to the police, or at least have access to them submitted. There are all these steps, and you can go and speak to somebody there about that. And then you can say, okay, you need somewhere to shoot. So you can you can go and buy some land that have deer on it, but you probably can't afford that just by pure statistics. So you need to go and find somewhere to shoot. So you can find out what it's like there are guided stalking days where you pay for somebody to take you out for the opportunity to shoot deer. It's not guaranteed, but the opportunity to shoot deer, because it's part of wider deer population management within that area. But some places will only let you shoot on that ground, even if you pay them, if you have a qualification. So for most people, that's their DSC1, Deer Stalking Certificate 1. So you can go down there and you can find the people that administer the certificate, or at least people that run the courses.
Yeah.
Or there's the PDS one, which is a different qualification, but meant to be broadly similar. And all of those, you can go along and keep chaining together all those conversations and fill a whole day. Get all the information you want. You can walk away filled with flyers and magazines and all this other stuff. But you'd have to go and chase it down. But at least there's one place, one location, one field that all of these people are standing in.
Yeah.
And you could do the same thing for fly fishing.
You can.
You could discover that actually most people who are fly fishing in the UK are doing it as catch and release. They're not doing it for food. Fly fishing for food is pretty rare, I would say, in most anglers in the UK now. But you can get some element of the sea angling in there, although there's probably less of it. That's the only thing there's not much of.
Yeah.
But I could keep repeating these conversations, but all these potential things you can go and talk to people about. If you can spend the entry fee, and it's not, it's not the cheapest, so it's £35 or so.
Yeah, it is. It's around
34.
35, something like that.
And there's, it'll cost more if you want to camp and things like that. But it's like, think of it as festival prices.
Yeah, do, because if you are planning on going, the things like the foods and the drinks are that little bit higher because of the fact that you are essentially at a festival.
Yeah.
But they are generally very good food and drink as well.
Oh yeah,
so.
There's huge food options as well. There's a whole,
there's so many.
One end of the field is food, basically, what it was last year. There are other things to look at as well in terms of equipment and trying things on. If you want to try different things, if you want to see what this feels like, if you want to see how this fits.
Yeah.
I've gone there with the intention of buying something, and having tried on 4 different versions of the same thing, I decided I don't want that thing anymore.
No.
I want this thing instead. If you go there with an open mind, and you have an interest in something related to this, you have an interest in the countryside, you have an interest in food from the wild, and you either want to access it through hunting or fishing, or you have ideas about it that you think it's a net negative, go there with that possibility. And if you go online, you can find lots of videos from previous game fairs and interviews and those kind of things. But if you just look at it and see lots of wealth, lots of people with posh accents, lots of very well-spoken people talking about pheasant shooting, talking about these things, and you think that's what it is, you couldn't be further from the truth. You'll find
really couldn't.
a lot of that there, but you will be surprised.
The game fair started in 1958. Originally, it was a venture by the Country Landowners Association. And since its beginning, it's had about 5.5 million visitors who have attended the event, which has travelled all over the country to different estates. It's been at Blenheim before a few times, and on the last occasion, that was in 2014.
James Gower. James is the director of Stable Events. He organises the Game Fair, and he is the event director of the Game Fair.
So we're going back to Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. It feels like a sort of coming home, if you like, for lots of people, and therefore we expect something like 135,000 visitors. The Game Fair is a very big event, lots of infrastructure required because, of course, it's not in a venue, not as such. It's everything's built from scratch: the roadways, the showers, the toilets, the restaurants, and that makes it one of the big outdoor shows, certainly up there with with the Highland and the Royal Welsh, and some people even refer to us as Glastonbury for the Green Welly Brigade. A lot of our visitors, they are the genuine participants of the countryside. A bit of rain, they actually call it refreshment. And of course, they'll have all the kit and all the gear, and they are less affected by bad weather. Now, clearly, we don't want bad weather. We want nice weather. But it is an audience that will turn up with their dogs. We get more dogs than crufts. And they'll be out there in the incredible surroundings of the estate. But of course, we all hope that the sun will be shining. Well, people often ask me what makes the Game Fair different to a county fair or other country shows. And the only way to really understand that is to be there. And I always say, it's not an agricultural show, it's not a farming show, it's a game fair. There's a big narrative and a large focus around food. Game, after all, it's about the food, it's about sustainability, it's about the food provenance, where it comes from, where to obtain it, how to cook it. So there's almost an educational as well as an enthusiast's approach to game as a food source. And I think that's probably one of the reasons that sets it apart. And you won't go there and find tractors and cows with rosettes on. What you'll find is 800 exhibitors with a huge broad spectrum of things that are available, either to assist you in your job, because you may well be occupied working in the countryside. There's an enormous number of landowners, estate managers, land managers, gamekeepers, river keepers, and so on. And so there's equipment professionally there for you. But equally, if you're interested in a new Grenadier or a new Bentley, or the chance to wander down Gunmakers Row and see literally tens of thousands of guns available. So it's pretty unique, very British, very traditional. It's part of people's lives. Many of them will come for 3 days. We've got probably 20,000 people camping during the 3 days. That includes exhibitors and visitors. And it has that sort of festival feel. It never really closes. There's always a little party going on somewhere, some negotiation happening somewhere else. And that's what makes it unique, in addition to the amazing estates that it goes to. So the final thing that really sets it apart is most agricultural shows are in agricultural show grounds, and they're purpose-built, and that makes them very samey each year. Whereas, a visit to Blenheim is different to a visit to Ragley Hall, or different to a visit to Hatfield House. So the estate itself plays a major part in defining and shaping and creating the feeling of the event.
And those people that are coming, why do you think people are coming? Are there different cohorts? Is there a spread of types of people coming, or reasons for coming to the game fairs, do you think?
I think lots of different types of groups of people come. So on Friday particularly, you'll see a business audience, not exclusively, but lots of networking, land agents, as I say, people employed within the sector, one way or another, and they are there on a corporate basis more often than not. And then on Saturday, you'll see a lot more families coming, groups of friends. We've got a big glamping area, and people will be coming for 3 days. It'll be a chance to meet up, talk about the season, where they're going, what they're doing, what they're wearing. You see that extend into Sunday, which of course is a bit more relaxed. So yeah, a huge variety of people there, either for business or for friends or for a day out, and a lot of shopping. I think during the last 20 years, the game fair has changed to reflect the market. And in fact, all good events will reflect the market. And that's possibly a little bit different for the game fair audience because it's so broad. The thing I've noticed is that COVID certainly drove people back to the countryside. The countryside was a place where people could escape, get some freedom, and feel safe, and that reconnected people to the countryside. I think people's passion for food, where it comes from, sustainability, conservation, is a little bit more mainstream in terms of its popularity and its importance. And so the game fair was always there and always welcomed a large audience that were tuned into that. But now more people are tuned in generally. And even fashion and lifestyle choices mirror that a little bit more of the game fair. So I'm not sure if the game fair's moved more towards a broader audience, or if the audience has moved more towards the game fair, or maybe a little bit of both. What you'll see is, I think, where before it was perhaps a specialist or more enthusiasts day out or occasion, it's actually a bit broader now and appealing to people that are interested in learning a lot more about their home, their countryside, their sustainability, and their food. And that's great. That's fantastic.
So when we run our courses and when we work with organizations and when even just through the content we create, when people ask, are there any kind of places I can go to learn more about wild food or anything like that? And one of the places that we send people to is like, go to something like the game fair, because you'll see something there that you don't normally see elsewhere in events, in outdoor events, and that kind of marketing. You will see people who and meet and talk to people who work on the land, people who work right in the world of wild food and wild game and countryside management and land management. So if somebody was attending the game fair upon our recommendation and they turned up because I kept telling them to, and they wanted to learn more about wild food, where would you send them?
Well, I think a visit to the Cookery Theatre has to be one of those destinations, because it's not a cookery theatre like any other. You'll see incredible chefs like Jose Soto, breaking down an entire wild boar. The same demonstration, from the field to the fort with venison. And people that haven't seen that before suddenly realize where bacon comes from and where pork chops come from, and because they've actually seen it as part of the animal. And I think that's a huge education and again, something pretty unique to something like the game fair. You're not going to see that at the Good Food Show, are you? Or anything like that. And the cooking of it is almost secondary. Of course, they are amazing chefs with incredible recipes and processes. But before you even get to the cooking, you've got to harvest it. And that's something that the game fair can deliver, in such an expert manner. And the other place I'd go to is the Game Fair Theatre, the Carter Jonas Game Fair Theatre, because before you even get to the food, they're talking about the land and managing that land in order to create the food. So you literally get a 360 view of the whole process, from conservation, land management, right the way through to harvesting and eventually cooking and then eating it. And so that's pretty unique to the game fair.
And of all the people, you're, I think, the best bet for some insider tips on what to do, what to see, what to visit at the game fair. Maybe things that you might overlook or aren't quite obvious. What's your insider tip?
Walk all the aisles for sure. So there are lots of repeat visitors to the game fair. Your listeners won't see it, but I've got the first ever show guide here.
Oh, fantastic.
And there are exhibitors in there that are still with us now. And they'll be there for a long time to come. But there are about 30% every year of new exhibitors offering gadgets and innovations or simply just wonderful produce. And there's some of the smaller stands that might be experimenting with the game fair and perhaps they're there for the first time. So root out them. Totally Food, which is around 120, 130 food exhibitors, is a great place to go because you can get little nibbles and samples as you walk along, probably enough for lunch even. And you'll find things there that you haven't seen anywhere else. If you can, then James Martin in the VIP enclosure is always a wonderful experience. And he's joined this year by Dick Strawbridge, Dick and Angel. You probably know him from Escape to the Chateau. But what people don't know is Dick is just an incredible cook. Since his sort of younger days in Ireland, when he was only allowed in the kitchen if he was carrying something on his back that still had legs and horns, that's how he was allowed into the kitchen. And so he's got a lifetime experience of doing some amazing things. So I'd go and do that. And then we've also got Merlin, the barman, who will mix something for you just to go with that meal. So it can be very, very tailor-made. And, he is, again, using all sorts of botanicals and things gathered from the countryside to match the flavors of some of the dishes. And, again, that's quite a unique experience. So I'll be looking out for that.
James Gower, thank you very much.
Thanks very much for having me.
So obviously we recorded that before we recorded this not live session up in the woods here. We will be attending the game fair. We will be attending the game fair as the podcast. So the current plan is to wander around with a big stick with a sign nailed to the top of it that says something about wild food chat. And we will be interviewing people at the game fair. We will be getting a little bit of the atmosphere and a little bit of the live reactions and our opinions on different things. We'll be sampling some of the food, some of the things, and seeing how long it takes before we get kicked out of different areas. And so if you are there on Friday or Saturday at the game fair and you see us wandering around with this big stick, then come along and say hello. And if you want to be on the podcast, then come along and say hello into the microphone and tell us what you think about the game fair. Tell us what you think about wild food in general. And we'd love to have you on the show. And if we do wander through past your food stand and I keep asking for samples, that means I don't want to pay for lunch. And that's it. We will be then putting that podcast out sometime in the week after the game fair, I think. We've got another thing to record next week, which will be coming out in between. Mm-hmm. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to us waffling on once again in a woodland. And if you can't make it to the game fair, then if you follow us on Instagram, or we're now on TikTok because I've been told I have to use TikTok. We're Wild Food People on both of those platforms. Mm-hmm. Come along to there and you'll see I'll be uploading videos and things all the way through. If you want to get some of that, then go along to those social media accounts. And that's it. That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for getting all the way through to the end. If you would like to support the show, then we have a Patreon account. It's patreon.com/wildfoodpeople. There you'll have early access to episodes, ad-free episodes, and a few extra behind-the-scene things occasionally, and a few other bits related to what we do. We're on social media, as I say, and you can find all of our information on our courses and all the other things about us on wildfoodpeople.co.uk. Wild Food People is recorded live in a woodland whilst Richard is being distracted by 5 squirrels fighting in a huge pile over there in the distance because they know when I haven't got the air rifle with me. It is a rural and outdoor production.